Good morning, Lou. Thank you so much. We're glad to be back here at WCAB. This is Word of Faith Response. Thank you again for tuning in with us. We're glad to be in the Blue Room here at WCAB with Lou. And we're so glad that you are listening to us. We have been sharing for now many weeks testimonies from people at the Word of Faith Fellowship telling you how Jesus has completely transformed our lives. You've heard testimonies from people who have been in prison and met Jesus, and God just transforms them and totally changes everything about their lives. You've heard testimonies from people who have gone through very great struggles and difficulties in their lives, and how in the hardest times in their life, Jesus came and helped them. And, you know, I was thinking about how the Bible says that we are to tell the wonderful works of the Lord. You read that in Psalms. I was reading on Isaiah where it says, make known the wonderful deeds of God throughout the world. And that's what we've been doing. We've been sharing with you the wonderful things about Jesus and what he has done. And today I have David Brown with me. He's been a member of the Word of Faith Fellowship for many years, and he is actually born and raised in Rutherford County and has lived here all his life, and except for a short period of time he lived in Charlotte. And David has a really miraculous testimony. When he was younger, David went through many things that were very difficult, were devastating. And so you're going to hear about these, and you're going to hear how through all of these difficult times in his life, Jesus brought him through it. And you're going to hear how it happened. You're going to hear how he came to know Jesus in what would be absolutely devastating to anyone. So, David, let's go ahead and get started. And would you just tell us, just start at the beginning. Okay. Tell us about your life.
Well, thank you, Mark. And good morning, everybody. And appreciate the privilege to be here this morning. As Mark said, I grew up in Rutherford County, actually Forest City. I was born in 1958. My father was Tom Brown. He was a mail carrier in town and worked for the post office for about 37 years, I think, somewhere along in there, and delivered mail on the eastern side of town for about half the time he worked for the post office. He walked about 15 miles a day, and my mother worked for, if many of the listeners may remember, the Union Trust Company, which goes way back, and my mother worked there for a while, and then later worked for Citizens Federal Savings and Loan in Rutherford for a gentleman named Lennon Clements, and worked there. And and my grandfather actually found out later in my life, I found out from my dad, my grandfather was head of the rationing board in Rutherford County during World War II. And my mother, she was from Pineville, North Carolina, and her dad was actually mayor of Pineville back in the early 60s, when Pineville was actually not part of Charlotte like it is now. So anyway, that was my parents, and I grew up in town, lived there on Powell Street, almost right across from where the post office is now, with my great aunt until I was about 4 years old. And Mom and Dad built a house over on Lincoln Road off of Hudlow Road, and so we lived there, and I attended Forest City Elementary School, and actually was in the first grade right after the school burned. If many people may remember, the old school there on Old Caroline Road had burned, and I actually spent half of the first grade in the basement of Cool Springs School until the school was finished. So anyway, I was there, went there through the 5th grade, and then when the county integrated and everything, I was in the 6th grade at Dunbar, and then went on to Cool Springs. While I was in the 4th grade, I was about 10 years old, my mother became sick, and you were mentioning some of the tragedies that had occurred in my life, and my mother became sick, and that fall, she had been working out in the yard and gotten bit by a spider and gotten sick. I don't remember very much about that. I just remember my dad telling me it made her just really sick, and they suspected it might have been a black widow spider, but they really didn't know because they didn't see what it was. And so she got better, but later that year, late December, she became sick, and that was the year Hong Kong flu there was a big epidemic of that, and it was really bad, and she got sick, and she came down with that, and I remember Dr. Becknell, who lived up just right out the road from us, came down, and I remember he admitted her to the hospital one night, and You know, being 10 years old, you don't remember a lot of details, but I just remember she was sick, and she went to Rutherford Hospital, and later lapsed into a coma, and died, and really difficult time, you know. And so here my dad is. He's about in his early 40s. I'm 10. My sister Beth was about 6 or 7. She was in the first grade, you know. And so you look back on things like this, and you really can see the hand of God in your life, the goodness of God. And about a year later, my father married my stepmom, and after they had been married for several years, and I was actually in the 9th grade. It was the fall of 1973. I was at East Rutherford High School, and my half sister was born. Susan was born, and so we had a good life. We always, you know, we attended church. I grew up in First Baptist Church. My dad had grown up in First Baptist Church in Forest City for years. And so, you know, we attended church very frequently. And along about the time, let's see, one little story I wanted to interject. My dad worked for the post office, as I said, and sometime in the mid-'60s, he got a rural route. So he was driving, and he delivered mail out in not Sunshine, but Shiloh, out Bethany Church Road, all out in that section. Well, there was a family out there that he delivered mail to, and it was Bill and Blanche Brock, who happened to be Jane Whaley's mom and dad. And Bill had a good-sized plumbing company back then, and Blanche, as a lot of people that knew her, was a very fine cook. I mean, she could cook, and she would always cook lunch for the men if they were working in town. Well, if my dad happened to be around delivering mail at lunchtime, she was always, you know, very frequently would say, "Tom, come in, I'll get you a plate, have something to eat," you know, and Dad was never one to turn down a good meal, so he went and ate lunch with them, you know, and that's, he got to know them, and all. So as time went on, as I said, I went to East Rutherford High School. I graduated from there in 1977. Along about the end of my 9th grade year, I became a member of the Key Club in high school. And the Key Club advisor was a lady named Sandra Norris. And she was a math teacher there in high school. And I think Sandra's been on here last, week or so. And she had a very big impact in my life, Mark. Very big impact in my life. I had a lot of teachers that cared, but I mean, she was special. I mean, she really, not only to make sure that you got what she was teaching, but she really took hold of my life and really cared. And so I had her for geometry in the 10th grade. And I think it was in the 10th grade. Yeah, it was in the 10th grade. We always had a free class. They called it study hall, but we normally didn't study. We, talked and whatnot. But I was right across the hall in Alan Carver's class for study hall, and Sandra was right across the hall. If anybody remembers, East Rutherford High School was right there on A hall. I think Sandra's class was A12 or something. Anyway, she was right across the hall. And so me and a couple other guys would go into her class and just sit there, with her. She let us come in and sit. We weren't disruptive or anything like that. And when the students were working on something in that Algebra 1 class, she would talk to us about Jesus, and she would share with us, and everything. And at that time, there was a Bible study going on at Bill and Blanche Brock's house, and she invited me to go. And this was in November of 1974. And I attended that Bible study. And as I said, I'd grown up in church. I knew there was a God, but I started learning that God honestly cared about my life and cared about me personally. And I'd always thought, well, I always had to try and do the best that I could do. It was all on me, and God was God, but it was just up to me, And I really learned that God He really cared about me. And so I attended that Bible study for years. And as I said, Sandra had a big impact on my life in high school. We were you know, a lot of the guys in the Key Club were always together. You know, there were Key Club meetings. We would go to the old Forest City Fish Camp years ago that Claude and, anyway, the Kaisers, I can't remember, and Mary was the lady's name, but anyway, they owned the fish camp back then, and we would have meetings there. Anyway, we were around her a lot, and I spent a lot of time over at their house. And Sandra's dad, Clyde, had actually been my principal at Cool Springs School, so, you know, I've known the family for years, and all. So she had a big impact on my life, and so I graduated high school, and then went to North Carolina State University for one semester, and then transferred back here. And it was Ralph and Mary Kaiser. I'm sorry, thank you. Ralph and Mary Kaiser were the owners of the fish camp back then, and I remember that very well. And we always enjoyed going there to eat on Tuesday or Thursday nights for our Key Club meetings. But anyway, after, as I said, I went to North Carolina State for a semester, transferred back here to isothermal, and went here. They were on quarter system back then, so I finished up that year, 1 quarter, and then went 2 full years after that. Well, during the period of time that I was there at ICC, my sister Beth, she was always the student that I never was. I mean, the girl worked hard, and she studied, where I was always coming home and going out and playing ball somewhere. She would come home and do her homework and sit in front of a TV and do her homework, and I never could figure out how in the world she could do that. You know, I had to have total quiet if I was going to study, you know. But she worked hard, and she was in her 12th grade year. She had been accepted at UNC Chapel Hill. She was going to go to school up there, and I think Beth was in the top 5 in her class. She was very smart and really good girl. Well, she was accepted to go to college, as I said, and right about, it was during the holiday break, Christmas break in, 1979-80, and it was December 79. She and our first cousin and another girl had gone up to Hendersonville just to go riding around and, you know, look at ride up in the mountains and so forth. So they were somewhere up around Hendersonville, and they were in a Jeep, CJ5 Jeep, and my sister was sitting in the back seat, and they were sitting in the front. Don't remember whether it had seat belts in the back seat or not. I don't know. Beth didn't have her seat belt on if it did. But they were traveling down a road, and it was paved, but it crested a hill. This is the story I remember, but it crested a hill, it turned to gravel, and they met a car, and almost head on. And the girl that was driving the Jeep swerved and lost control in that gravel. The Jeep rolled, and my sister was thrown out and killed. 17 years old, already accepted in college, you know, in the top, you know, tier of her class, you know, and had a lot ahead of her. And, you know, it was devastating enough when my mom died. But when Beth died, that was rough. And you know, and it was really rough on Dad, too, because here he had lost his wife. And then he had lost his daughter, you know.
How close were you in age to?
Well, she was born in June of '62, and I was born in October of '58, so that's about 3.5 years, I think, roughly.
Very close to
Yeah,
her.
very close, very close. And I always thought it was kind of nice because we were in high school together. I was in the 12th grade when she was in the 9th grade, you know. It was the only time we were ever at the same school, you know, same time. So anyhow, I never will forget it, where, you know, when things like that happen in your life, you seem to just always remember where you were exactly when that happened. And I was down at my aunt and uncle's house there on Valley View Drive in Forest City. Bill and Helen Brown. Bill was a vice president of Northwestern Bank in town, and was later with First Union and retired. But anyway, I was down there, spent a lot of time down there. So my cousin and I, William and I, we were out throwing a football out in the side yard when my aunt got a call that Julia, her daughter, and my first cousin, had been in an accident, and they think Beth was killed. And I'm like, ugh, you know. So we get together, and we all go over to my mom and dad's house, and we go in and tell Mom and Dad. You know, of course, that just blindsided both of them, because that's the last thing they were, you know, were expecting. So Dad and myself and my cousin William and William and I were like brothers growing up. I mean, we were, I never had a brother, but he and I were as close as brothers. And we were, really funny story. We used to visit each other a lot, and we would always, if I was down there, he would hide in the back seat and in the floorboard of my parents' car to try and sneak out to go spend the night at my house, or I'd do the same, if they came over to our house. We just always wanted to be together. So anyway, he and I and Dad, we rode up to Hendersonville to the hospital, and of course Dad went in and did whatever you do when somebody's killed in a car accident, that sort of thing. And so we came back, drove back. Now, my mom and Dad's house was on Lincoln Road, just I don't know, maybe a couple hundred yards from Dr. Becknell's house, if anybody knows where that is. And when we turned onto Lincoln Road, I've never seen so many cars on that road in my life. I mean, across the street, on either side of the street in front of the house, the driveway was packed. And we walked in, parked in the driveway, and got out and walked in that door. I never will forget it. I walked in that door, went right from the carport, right inside the kitchen. And my mother had been good friends with Blanche Brock for years. They were members of a ladies' organization back then called Women's Aglow, and they did a lot of things together, and Blanche was there. And when I first found out that my sister had been in a car accident, I called Sandra Norris, to get her to pray for us, And she and Blanche were in that kitchen, and the house was full of people, Everybody was really distraught. And my next door neighbor, Ruth Henson, told me later, and her son Billy and I were very close. Billy was a year older than me. And she said it just devastated him as well as the rest of us. She said he just cried and cried and cried and cried, She was always, Beth was always about like a little sister to him. Billy had a big sister, but he was the youngest of their two children. And he always kind of looked at Beth like a little sister. So it tore him up pretty bad. But Sandra, talked to me, and, different people come up and speak, but she talked to me, and it really kept me from being overwhelmed with grief. It honestly did. And all. So, God saw me through that, and all. And as I finished school at isothermal, I got my associate's degree there, and I went on to UNC Charlotte. And while I was down there, I met a girl, and we later got married. And while I was down there at school, I was away from the godly influence that I had here. And there was a lot of ungodly influence down there. And I was blessed to have 3 good roommates. They had on-campus apartments down there, and we each had an individual room and so forth. But anyway, there were 3 guys. All of them were from Ellenboro, and very good guys, and very special friends, and all. But there was a lot of ungodly influences that were around there, and my life started slipping, while I was there. So anyway, we got married, and we'd been married about 8.5 years, and had. I didn't have any children or anything like that. But after we'd been married about 8.5 years, things were getting a little bit rocky, but nothing that I expected. And
were you living in Charlotte?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Did you stay in Charlotte after you graduated from
yes.
UNC Charlotte?
I did. I had, before we were married, I'd gotten a job down there with a company called ADP, Automatic Data Processing, and they had offices all over the country. But anyway, that's who I was working for. And we were living in Charlotte, married 8.5 years, as I said. And she one day just said, "I feel like we need to separate." And it literally devastated me. And we later divorced. But one thing that God took me back to years, and this is nothing against her, God has done such a work in my heart with all the hurt and the wounding and everything, to where, and I don't feel 1 ounce of animosity toward her whatsoever. But God took me back to a place. I was getting off work off I-77 South on the Woodlawn Road on the off-ramp, and God spoke to me, and he said, "Don't do it. Don't get married." And I thought, everybody's told me you're getting cold feet, you'll have second thoughts and all this kind of stuff. And I'm going, okay, well, that must be what it was. But later on, I realized that was God speaking to me, because 8.5 years, you see what happened. Right. And if it wasn't the will of God for me to marry her, then it wasn't the will of God for her to marry me. That's just, So anyway, we divorced, and that was a very rough time. You'd lost your mom, you'd lost your sister, and now this. And so we divorced, but I was home one weekend to see my parents. I called Sandra Norris. Hadn't talked to her in a long time. And she said, I really felt like something was wrong when you called. She said, and she invited me to church the next day. And I attended Word of Faith Fellowship. And that was January of 1992. And never will forget it. And so I would come home and go to church there. And after, on weekends, I would come home, and pack up my stuff on Friday and come on in and spend the weekend. So at some point in time, I think it was about February, one Sunday night, there was a group of guys prayed for me. Now, I had lost weight. I never have been a very big person, but I lost about 10 pounds, and I didn't really have 10 pounds to lose. And we had an hour for lunch. You'd go to lunch, and honestly, I could not eat. It took me an hour to get a meat and 2 vegetables eaten. It was that bad. So, that and, but they prayed for me that Sunday night.
That was at the Word of Faith.
Yes, it was Word of Faith. And there was a group of about 4 or 5 guys. A lot of Ryan and Rusty Millwood, who were from the town. They were 2 of the guys that prayed for me. And I graduated high school with their older brother, Ricky. And anyway, and they prayed. And I got in my car and left. And I remember, as plain as day, I was on Highway 74, somewhere around the Broadway overpass or Old Carolina overpass. And it was like I could honestly breathe, Mark. The oppression was so bad. I can't describe it. It was so bad. You go to work and you have a hard time focusing on your work and you can't eat lunch and you just all this stuff. And but I felt like somebody had lifted a pound of concrete off my back or something, So and when I would come to town, they would pray for me, when I'd be in town. And over the years, so about that spring, I started coming to church, or I had been coming to church, but that spring I really felt like God was saying, David, you need to move back here. I never thought, I was in Charlotte, I was working in Charlotte, had my career in Charlotte. I wasn't moving back to Rutherford County. There was nothing back there for me, but God began to get to my heart. And my heart, it really started to change. So I moved back here and didn't have a job when I moved back here, but God provided a job for, I worked at Mastercraft for a period of time. So kind of fast forward a little bit here, but anyway, I've been in church, as I said, since 92. I moved here in July of 92, and it's been life-changing. I met my wife here, and no man told me who to marry. Jane Whaley did not tell David Brown to marry Karen Berry. Did not. And I met Karen at church, and we just became friends, and I met her family, her mom. They were all from South Carolina. Her dad was a peach farmer down there, and he was back and forth a lot, and very sweet people, very sweet people. And so Karen and I got to be very good friends. And I always wanted to be married again, but I didn't move back here looking for a wife. I just wanted my life, right with God, my heart right. I knew I had gone down the wrong path. And so Karen and I later got married, and God blessed us with a child. We were both in our early 40s, and we have a 14-year-old son who is a big blessing. It always frightened me, really, Mark. It frightened me to have a child years ago. I'm thinking, and it's like one of the church members, Connie Davies, her husband Charles were on here, and she told me one time, David, she said, it's one of the biggest blessings you'll ever have. She said, I'm closer to my children now than they were when they were a lot younger, and I'm finding that out to be true. He's my friend, he's my son, but he is my friend, and he's 14 years old. When I was 14, I was in the 8th grade. Mm-hmm. He's in the 10th. He does 10th grade work. and make straight A's. He's learned to play the piano and a lot of things that I never did, and sharp as a tack. I mean, if I ever remember anything, all I have to do is say, Bradley said, what, you know, and he'll remember it. You know, he's just really sharp. So, it's just been a blessing. My mother-in-law lives with us, and she is such a blessing. Karen's mom does. And it's just been great. And Sam and Jane Whaley have been so good to me. I've known them since they lived across the road from Bill and Blanche Brock back when I was going to Bible study years ago. And Jane has always been there to help me, doesn't tell me what to do. And I'd always, growing up, I was always wanting somebody to tell me what to do, you know. Uh-huh. And if I've ever gone to her and wanted her to tell me what to do, she'd say, you need to pray and you need to hear from Jesus what to do. Uh-huh. And that's always, she's always put the responsibility, because I was always one not to take responsibility, really. Uh-huh. I was. And she's taught me to be responsible, you know. Pray and hear from Jesus what you need to do. And that's the direction she's pointed me, not telling me you need to do this, this, and this, and all. And Sam has been precious. My father died in 2013, and Sam got a group of guys coming over, mowed my yard. Sam's the one that rode the lawnmower around and mowed the yard, and the guys put mulch out and did my shrubs and the things that I just needed my lawn mowed, you know, and the shrubs done. He got a guy bring over a load of mulch. Guy came over and pressure washed my driveway, and all of that. I never saw the bill for the first thing. I didn't, you know, not a penny, you know. They have been so good to me, and I can't say enough about them. Their daughter, Robin, she's just been a precious friend. I've known her since she was in first grade, you know, and it's been great. And what God's done for me, He'll do for anybody. When you give your life to Jesus, all things start falling into place, you know.
And you work now at Robin's Painting Carver. How long have you been there?
20 years this September.
How did you get that job?
Oh, anyway, Jim and myself had ushered together at a wedding, and I knew Jim Robbins, who he was. I never knew him personally. Yeah. And he and I ushered at a wedding, and previously, and a job came open at the paint store. The guy had left, and Jim had an opening. So anyway, I went and interviewed, and I wound up getting the job. And I think it was the first week I was there. Jim called me in his office one day, and he said, I don't know if you believe this kind of thing, but he said, I was really praying about who to hire. And he said, all I could remember was a face from when we had ushered together. And he said, that's all I could remember. But when you came in and interviewed for that job, you were that person.
That's great.
So I knew God gave me that job. Right. It's been a blessing. He's been such a good man to work for. Yeah. Such a good man to work for, you know.
That is so good, David, and thank you so much. That was really encouraging, and it's just amazing how Jesus healed your heart. You know, as you were sharing, I could just hear your heart has been healed, and you went through all of these devastating things, but yet somehow in the midst of it, losing your mother, losing your sister, you went through this separation and divorce. You were shocked about that,
right?
As you were telling me earlier, and yet, as you're sharing today, you are a man who God has touched your heart, and you don't carry around all kinds of grief and devastation because Jesus touched your heart, you know. And for all those who are listening, you know, that's such an encouragement that Jesus can do that for all of us. He can, whatever you're going through today, whatever you've been through in the past, Jesus is there to heal your heart, just like He did David's heart. So I encourage you just to turn your heart to Jesus like David did. Turn your heart to Jesus. He'll heal your heart. He'll bring you through everything you're going through. So thank you again. This is Word of Faith Responds, and we're so glad you listened. Please go to our website. It's wordoffaithfellowship.org, and you can hear more testimonies about what Jesus has done in our lives. Thank you, and have a great day.